Hey folks, I want to welcome everyone. People are still coming in, but I'm going to roll on. I have a theory about phone calls. Nobody listens to here's the first two words you say, so in a presentation, nobody's going to hear the first two paragraphs you say anyway. Hi folks, my name is Beth Bashir, and I want to welcome you. Thank you for coming this evening. I understand President Trump was in town. We invited him, but we were not able to work out enough security measures in our town to protect him. Who was at the protest today? Anybody here? Excellent. Excellent. Good job. All right. Good job, everyone. Would you, oh, please. Okay, Shoshana's going to introduce us.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Shoshana Ruth Wechter. I'm a librarian here at the Ypsilanti District Library. So 20 years ago, an act of discrimination against an LGBT student group by a local business resulted in Ypsi's first non-discrimination ordinance, one of the first of its kind in Michigan. This process included arduous local campaign, surprising tactics, national celebrities, and unified as well as divided the city in surprising ways. For many, this campaign was a life-changing event. Now more than ever, people are realizing that the fight for equality must include everyone and must be continued. Earlier this year, the City of Ypsilanti's Human Relations Commission added language to the non-discrimination ordinance, explicitly protecting gender identity and expression, as well as immigration status. Here is a success story from your own local town that will make you proud of your town, your neighbors, and your friends. I'm extremely grateful to be able to present this program tonight. If it weren't for the works of these individuals as well as the larger movement, I wonder whether I'd feel as comfortable addressing a large crowd of people as a publicly visible transgender woman. Without further ado, we present our program on Ypsilanti's non-discrimination campaign.
Thank you, Shoshana. So let me introduce you to our panel. And I just want to say just really quickly, campaigns and our particular campaign are not linear. There are often 7 things happening at once. And so we've done our best to recall a story from 20 years ago in slightly aging brains and put it into a sensible order for you all. And I'm hopeful that we did a good job. And afterwards, I'm sure you're going to tell us. Anyway, the people here to tell you our story in no particular order are Cheryl Farmer. Thank you. Was the mayor of Ypsilanti throughout the process. She met the students that first day and led the city council through the process. Lisa Mills Walters. Thank you. She was a city council representative from Ward 2. She had supportive constituents and was strongly supportive of the ordinance and the campaign. John Gallus. Modest as always. City council from Ward 2. And he was on the subcommittee that researched and drafted the ordinance itself. There were a few models out there at the time, but not a lot of consistency. And this was pre-internet, so their legwork was nothing. Gary Clark. He called the initial meeting of citizens, was constantly involved in the community and campaign groups. He was also a key liaison between city and community leaders throughout the campaign. Ray Mullins, gentleman next to me. He was the head of the local chapter of the NAACP and was a tireless advocate for getting a supportive statement from that organization. His work in some ways had more hurdles, but yielded ultimate success that was vital to avoid increasing divisions in our little city. We were hoping that Terry McDonald would join us today, and sadly he had something that came up at the last minute. Terry was...
You missed Lisa.
I'm not done.
Oh, good.
I'm just going through my list. Lisa is last in my heart.
First. I would never say that.
Terry McDonald, he was a key help in strategizing and kept us from any potential traps that could have cost us the election. His pragmaticism and advice was invaluable. Lisa Zuber, the complainer on the end, was the volunteer coordinator for the campaign. This was a big task. We had phone banks with landlines and people going door to door every night. She scheduled, fed, and organized training for all of it. By the way, unintuitively, Lisa concluded her hunt for her husband through this campaign, met and eventually married John Gaulis on the 3rd anniversary of our ordinance's passing. And then there's me. I'm Beth Bouchard. I was one of the 2 co-chairs for the campaign alongside Paul Heaton. He lives in D.C. now and could not be here this evening. This was an entirely volunteer campaign, so for both of us, this was nearly a full-time task we took on. We acted as both strategists and spokespeople for the campaign. We called ourselves spokesmodels. The remaining members of City Council that unanimously passed that ordinance were Trudy Swanson from Ward 1, Ronnie Peterson from Ward 1, and Pam Cuthbert from Ward 3. For all of us, this campaign was a personal watershed event. The process was highly charged. The stakes felt extremely high, and many of us vanished from our personal lives for months. The ultimate success was cathartic. I hope you enjoy the story. After the presentation, we will open up the floor for questions. Let us begin. Gary Clark, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. I'm going to read a good deal of what I'm going to say, tonight, but I want you to look around the room. We've posted memorabilia from our campaign in a lot of different places. Some of them are stories from the newspapers. Others are things that we sent to people. This piece back here is the original complaint from Lynn DiOrio to the City Human Relations Commission, and when at your leisure you're able to go through them, that would be probably a fun journey for you. I was one of the people who started a group called Citizens for Community. It happened in February of 1997. C4C, as it came to be known, was a group of local citizens initially formed to protest the refusal by Hanson Standard Printing to print a raffle ticket for an EMU LGBT student organization called Tri-Pride, and a copy of that raffle ticket is up there. As time passed, C4C went on to advocate for an Ypsilanti City Non-Discrimination Ordinance that specifically protected the citizens of Ypsilanti against discrimination by race, sex, marital status, familial status, age, disability, national origin, source of income, and sexual orientation. No one complained about any of them but the last one. And it was a battle that lasted over a year and a half. In the process of preparing for tonight's presentation, I had a few things copied, these, at Standard Printing. And the current owner and I had a discussion that resulted in feeling a need to separate the past from the present. Therefore, before I say anything more, I'd like to introduce the current owner of Standard Printing, Steve Dubrovich. He is the second owner of this business since the Hansons, and they were the owners at the time of the events we are discussing tonight. So, Steve, please, you have some comments you'd like to make.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks, Gary, and everybody here for organizing this event and allowing me time and opportunity to speak. Thanks to all in attendance that have made it a priority to recognize this historic anniversary. In the time since the anti-discrimination ordinance was passed 20 years ago, much has changed at Standard Printing. Ownership has changed hands twice now, and we have implemented a complete overhaul of leadership and business practices. We are proud to employ staff with differing sexual orientations, ethnic backgrounds, and religious beliefs at our shop, and we work to provide a safe haven for each of our employees. We understand that the viability and success of our surrounding community starts right here with acceptance and understanding in the workplace. In addition to our hardworking staff, we also find ourselves lucky to be located in such an iconic district of Ypsilanti. It is an honor to serve a diverse clientele with equal respect and kindness, and we share in the goal to eliminate discrimination from our community. We are grateful to be a member of the progressive city of Ypsilanti and believe our strength as a community comes from our vast diversity. We appreciate the efforts of everyone involved to ensure that hurtful and hateful mindsets become a thing of the past. So I just wanted to let everyone know that this was 2 owners ago. I have nothing to do with the Hanson. So I just wanted to be clear, when Gary came into the print shop and he was printing out everything for this, I was like, Gary, I'm not really sure if I'm comfortable with this. And so we talked about this event, and I asked if it would be okay if I came and talked for a couple minutes about what we stand for now. And, you know, like I said, the way I was raised is you treat everybody how you want to be treated, regardless of what they believe. And that's how everyone at Standard Printing is. So, you know, if anybody wants to come by Standard Printing and have a tour, we do those all the time and see what we really do. But thank you, everybody, for giving me a moment to come in here and explain how we are and not what the Hansons were. I am definitely not Hanson, so I just wanted to make that clear. So thank you, everybody. Thanks.
I wanted to say something further, because in our discussion, you said, to this day, people still come or don't come to Hanson's, to Standard Printing, because of what happened in the past. This is 20 years later. And while I was there, that poster right there, "Say No to Special Treatment to Homosexuals," was on the top of a pile of things I had copied. And a gentleman was sitting 2 seats down, waiting for something, and he asked me if he could have a copy of that. And I said, well, that is the opposite of what our ordinance stood for. And he looked at me and he said, I know that. He said, I'm from Novi. So the citizens of Novi should probably pay attention to, or listen to what's being said here tonight, because he took that as a template. So anyway, you know, C4C started in an odd kind of way. My partner came home from work, and he said when he got home that there was a small group of people outside Hanson Standard Printing with signs. And I had just had surgery, so I couldn't walk. But he walked down to Depot Town, and we live close. And he said when he came back that the story of Pride was that there was a raffle ticket going to be printed, but that they had refused to print it on religious grounds, and that wasn't the protest was about. And, you know, we kind of looked at each other and we said, you know, that's not the kind of community that we know. And perhaps we should enlarge the thinking about this and involve the community, because this seems like a community issue, not just a single event. And so what we did was we went in our address books and we called every single LGBT person we could think of, and we asked them to come to a meeting to see what to do about it. And we had 50 people show up at the EMU Education Center, which is now Harvest Kitchens in Depot Town. And I have to tell you, I didn't know there were 50 gay people in our neighborhood or even in the city. And they were people who, some of them didn't know each other. So this was really cool, because everybody kind of got to know each other, and we found out what each other did. But we also made a decision to pursue this further. And we wanted to include our straight allies and decided to form an official group to see how to go forward. And we named ourselves Citizens for Community to stress unity and mutual respect of people within the city. The slogan, "There ought to be a law," you can see up there, "Against discrimination," became our mantra, and it represented us very well. We developed a flyer which went to people in the press. which asked and answered 6 questions about discrimination. We also produced large amounts of information that was released to the public and the press, and we obtained a letter of support from Representative Barney Frank and went to speak with him at National Coming Out Day celebration in Detroit. Although C4C and Ypsilanti Campaign for Equality got eventual support from Coretta Scott King, Washington Rainbow Action Project, Jim Toy, the NAACP, and several national LGBT organizations, we made a decision to keep our steering committee and our activities local, and that decision would serve us well. C4C met with city council members, human relations committee members, held educational seminars with the help of the American Friends Service Committee, and we'll always be grateful to Jan Wright. We went door to door. We compiled a list of names of sympathetic voters and other allies that we could circle back to later, and we attended every city council meeting and human relations commission meeting over a 9-month period to talk about our support of this ordinance and to speak our truth. Sometimes the opposition, I swore to myself I wasn't going to do this. God damn it. The opposition was really angry and really hateful, and the public comment portions of these meetings went into the night. They lasted past midnight sometimes, and we had to sit there and listen each time to people maligning us and telling us that we were horrible and literally damned to hell, and this went on for over a year, after which we'd go home and cry and pray and try to sleep, and then have to go back to work the next day as if nothing had happened. We were not fun. And public commentary got bigger and bigger and bigger. And we had to keep moving venues. So we went from City Hall to Riverside Arts Center. Then from Riverside Arts Center, we went to the auditorium in the high school. And then from there, we went to Hoyt Conference Center when City Council finally passed the ordinance. You're going to hear stories tonight about a few of the hundreds of people affected by this conflict which divided us. And yet, in the end, the efforts resulted in our city passing a comprehensive non-discrimination ordinance and changing our city motto to include the word diversity. It didn't have that before. However, even before the city council passed this ordinance, we knew that if it passed, it would be challenged in court. We had been told as much, and so the need for a campaign which was registered as such and specifically targeted to the defense of our ordinance had to be formed. After this decision, C4C morphed into an entity called Campaign for Equality. Beth Basher and Paul Heaton were the co-chairs of this campaign, and Beth is here to talk about that part of it tonight. Before she does, though, there's something I want to do real quickly, and that is just go through this sequence of events so that people who were not here can kind of understand what happened and when it happened. So I'll do this very quickly. Here, why don't you hold that? I can talk loud. I'm used to yelling at ice rinks, so I make a lot of noise if I have to. On 2/10/97, Tri-Pi placed this order. On 2/12/97, the Hansons refused to print it. Thank you. On 2/13, Tri-Pride met with the Hansons to try to work it out, which did not happen. On 2/14, there was a small protest outside the print shop. On 2/19, C4C, all those people we called together, had our first meeting at what is now Harvest Kitchen. On 2/21, 100 people protested in favor of the Hansons in front of the Hansons in Depot Time. So look how fast all of this happened. In 3/20, Tri-Pride attorney filed the complaint with Ypsilanti Human Relations Commission that is on the wall over there. This action started a series of events resulting in 9 months of contentious hearings and public commentary. C4C, EMU, and the American Friends Service Committee on 4/28 to 4/30 facilitated community education and understanding sessions. 5/97 to 12/97, C4C fundraises seek support from other groups, allies of all kinds, the news media, and so forth. Okay, so I know that all you people who are techies are laughing your at this. I know that, so, okay. National Coming Out Day panel happened with Barney Frank on 10/4. 11/3, we prepared for the Ordinance Challenge. C4C and YFCA met to work together. That was the date that the announcement came out from Beth about this. Then the NAACP letter of support, then the City Council's first reading on 11/18, then 12/15, the non-discrimination ordinance was approved, and then the first challenge was filed immediately and cost citizens opposing special treatment on the wall over there happened. Then these YCFE obtained and uses voter information, canvasses door to door. Reggie White happened, which we're going to go into. And on 5/5, the first challenge was rejected by Ypsilanti voters by a large margin. So I'm kind of, at this point, going to turn it over to Cheryl Farmer, who was the mayor at the time that all of this happened. And there was something really remarkable that when this happened, Cheryl really could not understand that she didn't get how people would be discriminatory. And that was her steadfast thing through the whole, you were very steadfast through the whole thing, so thank you.
You never know when you run for public office what you're going to wind up facing. I ran to implement the new city charter, and I was pretty naive about all of the things that were to come later. So, in order to juggle my mayor duties with my busy medical practice, I had set aside half a day a week to be used exclusively for City Hall business. And the first hour of the afternoon each week was a time with the city manager to go over signing things that needed to be signed and being updated on ongoing issues and upcoming issues. And then the balance of the afternoon, the city staff could schedule people to meet with me if constituents called in wanting to meet. And I never knew until I got to City Hall what the afternoon would bring. So one day it brought a couple of students from Eastern Michigan University, and they were there to complain that Hanson's Standard Printing in Depottown had at first agreed and then later refused to print their order for raffle tickets. And this was for a Pride event, and that, of course, was the campus organization promoting gay pride and gay acceptance. And it seemed very clear to the students that that was the reason the order was being refused, because of the cause that it would support. And so the students came to see me as the mayor do something, and they had an attorney with them who had drafted a legal complaint, and I was confounded by this, really. It seemed so mean and stupid. Why would anyone refuse to print raffle tickets? And I understood that the students felt hurt, but it seemed like such a small problem to me. Not life, not death. Not what I'm used to dealing with and as a doctor, okay? More of a problem of incivility, probably stemming from a misunderstanding, certainly not rising to the level of requiring an attorney. In fact, it seemed to me that perhaps this would be the first important task for our new Human Relations Commission to negotiate. So we had, as part of the new charter, set up a Human Relations Commission that was charged with improving civility across the community and understanding across the community, because we do have a diverse community, and they really hadn't had anything to do yet. So this seemed like a good first task. So, let's just find a way to get along. So I suggested to the students and their attorney that City Council talk about referring the issue to the Human Relations Commission as a first step, and they agreed. And I had no idea at that time how much animosity gay people face in their everyday lives. I had no idea how big this issue would be, how contentious it would be, how divisive it was destined to become, and so as it turned out, I was approaching a very steep learning curve. And it seemed like it went on and on and on, because it did. So I took the issue to City Council, and City Council referred it to the Human Relations Commission for further discussion and consideration. Take it away.
Actually, this newspaper is from right after that first meeting, and it was actually had to be moved. There were so many people that came to City Council, and it went to, they had it at Riverside Arts Center. My name's Lisa Zuber. I was the volunteer coordinator, but probably one of the things that I got questioned about was why I was a straight single woman working on an issue like this. But I was a board member at the time of PFLAG Ann Arbor, and for those of you who don't know what PFLAG stands for, it's Parents, Family, and Friends of Lesbians and Gays, and there was a chapter, there still is a very strong chapter here in Ann Arbor. And the reason I was had been involved in PFLAG is I have a family member who is like my big brother, my cousin Jack, who we have been like this forever. And my cousin Jack is gay. And in 1992, he told me that he was HIV positive. And for those of you that know, during those early 90s, an HIV positive person, that was a death sentence. I'm happy to say my cousin Jack is still alive, but that was, at the time, even though it was out there, PFLAG was the only place that actually had any kind of support group for HIV and AIDS. Family members or people to come talk to. And so that's how I initially got involved. It just so happened that when this issue came up, I had been laid off from my job. I had been thinking about moving and decided to stay in Michigan, and lo and behold, this is what happened. So I kind of found my niche, but no other PFLAG board members were available at the time to speak at the first council meeting, so I did. And after that, once they sent the decision to the Human Relations Commission, we had a series, as Gary talked about, of Human Relations Commission meetings and hearings. And they were awful. And Gary said that. And we would all go to these meetings, and afterwards, we would go mostly to sidetrack and drink. I think that was part of it. But we were all together in this, and we would speak, and we would also listen to this. But I mean, there would be 400 and 500 people coming to these Human Relations Commission meetings. They were televised in all the Detroit TV stations. So it was all over. I think every single one of these people at this table probably were interviewed by a television crew about it. So one of the times that I remember is they were also extremely powerful. And one of the times was when Lisa Bashir got up and spoke, and each time she went over an incident of hate or violence to a person within this community, and each time she spoke about one of those incidents, the person that was affected stood up in the audience. And that was so powerful, and I believe part of that ended up when the chief of police ended up looking into the things that had happened here in Ypsilanti, and but we stayed together in that, and we just, I can't say enough about the friendships and what had happened in this situation, this whole campaign, the 14 months. I have made lifelong friends. This was a life-changing event for me, and we supported each other, and we'll talk more about that, about the campaign and as it went on. Gary's going to also talk about the Human Relations Commission.
I have something, a statement that I was going to read, but I also wanted to say I was one of those people who stood up. And it was because it could have been anybody. I was driving down the street, and a car was next to me with two young college men in it, and we stopped at a stoplight, and they looked over, and they smiled at me, and I just nodded and we went on through the light, and at the next light, one of them got out of the car and came up to me, and I rolled down the window, and I said, "Can I help you?" And he had a knife in his hand, and he was trying to slash my face, and he called me queer. And I rolled up the window and drove away, and we were right by the police station, and when I rolled up the window, it shut on his hand, and the knife went into my car. And so I went to the police station. I had the knife with his fingerprints on it and everything, and I gave it to the police, and I never heard another thing back. So I'm not sure the moral of that story exactly, except that it could have been any straight man in that car. It could have been another gay person. It could have been a woman in that car. It could have been anybody. But the police didn't follow up on it, and I guess I was very concerned about the fact that that didn't happen. But after that, like you said, things started to change, and people started to look at this, and so it made a difference.
I have one more thing here, if you did.
The vote, after 4 or 5 of these Human Relations Commission's sessions, the vote happened, and I so clearly see this. The commission only had, there were 9 people on the Human Relations Commission. At the time, there were only 8 sitting on the stage in the auditorium in Ypsi High School. And we stood there and we sat there and waited, and they were doing all kinds of things, I think trying to slow it down. And then the last member showed up and they did the vote. And the vote was 5-4 not to recommend for City Council to do an ordinance, and also that there would be no action for against Hanson's. So we were stunned, but it was clear that they were slowing the process down to wait for that last person to come, and they were a no vote. So that was really hard.
This is what happened next. June 28, 1997, Ypsilanti citizen groups asked City Council to enact anti-discrimination ordinance. Ypsilanti Citizens for Community, an organization representing over 60 gays, lesbians, and bisexuals, as well as their friends, neighbors, and supporters in the Ypsi community, is calling for swift City Council action to draft a comprehensive anti-discrimination ordinance which would protect all Ypsilanti residents. This call follows nearly 3 months of often rancorous public hearings before the city's Human Relations Commission, after which the commission decided by unanimous vote to take no action regarding a dispute between Tri-Pride and the Hanson Standard Printing. The Ypsilanti Citizens for Community believes that the Human Relations Commission hearing and deliberation process was clouded by unwarranted and unfounded concerns by some commission members that recommending an anti-discrimination ordinance might open up the city to potential lawsuits, might weaken existing civil rights protections for other groups, or might force churches or other religious institutions to accept city regulations which conflict with their religious values, none of which was true. Ypsilanti Citizens for Community is eager to counter these concerns with research and documentation. As one of the group members said, to act in this way is to presume that the rights pie is a limited one and that there are only so many rights to go around and that we must protect our rights even if it means denying some to another group. We believe instead that by protecting and expanding the basic civil rights and protections of other groups, we automatically support and enhance our own protections. It goes on, and I don't need to go into the particulars of it, but we kind of asked that City Council take this on, and City Council indeed did take it on. And I think we go to Lisa next.
Thank you, Gary. As Gary said, I'm Lisa Walters. I was elected to the City Council in 1995 when I lived in the 2nd Ward. I had not heard Cheryl Farmer's comments when I prepared mine for tonight, but my first sentence is similar to her last, which was that I don't think any of us on council guessed how intense the reaction to this issue would be, especially on the part of the opposition. And by the way, I did write my comments, not because I wouldn't know what to say, but because I will not stop if I don't write them down and stop when I get to the end. So, all right. Suddenly, council meetings were so well attended, as was mentioned before, that they had to be moved from City Hall to the Riverside Arts Center, Ypsilanti High School, and the Hoyt Conference Center on EMU's campus. Audience participation became lengthy and heated. People whom we had never known to express an opinion about the city suddenly became very vocal, and many who had never attended a council meeting became very familiar to us. In some ways, dealing with this ordinance was difficult, and in some ways it was simple. It was difficult to hear some of the comments from audience members at council meetings. My best friend of 42 years is a gay man, so the hatred and vitriol expressed was painful to hear. The ignorance and lack of compassion was disheartening. One neighbor who telephoned in opposition to the ordinance said she didn't want to identify herself because her best friend's son was gay. My first thought was that someone whose best friend's son was gay should have more understanding of the issue. My second thought was that she didn't need to identify herself because I had caller ID. I didn't tell her. While there was only one threat of physical violence that I'm aware of, council members routinely received letters and phone calls telling us that we would cause the end of civilization. We were turning Ypsi into Sodom and Gomorrah. We were going to hell. I wasn't worried about going to hell, but I was afraid that someone might try to send me there. Each time I got a letter from someone opposed to the ordinance, I replied with a document listing common questions about the ordinance and answers explaining my position. Friends and colleagues told me I should ignore these people. Nevertheless, I persisted. Plagiarism. So while the fight was a difficult experience, knowing what to do was a simple decision. It was obvious to all of us on council that we needed this ordinance. Sometimes, as an elected official, your personal beliefs conflict with your constituents' wishes, and you have to work to find a balance. In this case, that wasn't a problem. The vast majority of the residents of my ward supported the ordinance and let me know. I kept a record of phone calls and letters I received, and they ran about 10 to 1 in support of the ordinance. This is especially impressive when you consider that we generally heard from our constituents only when they had a complaint. This was perhaps the only issue for which I received messages of support. I remember the exact words of one woman who called me and said, "I've never called a council person before and I don't have time to talk, but I had to tell you you're doing the right thing." Even though we knew we were doing the right thing, it was gratifying to get that positive reinforcement. One of the complaints of those opposed to the ordinance was that council should listen to the advice of the Human Rights Commission. But that commission was made up of people who were appointed, not elected, and their vote was 5 to 4, which basically meant that one person, who was not chosen by voters, was making a decision for everyone in the city. Council was made up of 7 persons, all of whom were chosen by their constituents, and all of whom agreed that passing this ordinance was the right thing to do. Resistance to the ordinance came from both inside the city and out of it. As Catholics, Mayor Pro Tem Terry McDonald and I were particularly targeted by the Credo, a very conservative Ann Arbor-based newspaper founded by Tom Monahan. I received many phone calls and had long discussions with one of their writers, who always referred to me in her articles as Catholic Council Member Lisa Walters, and to Terry as Catholic Mayor Pro Tem McDonald. Presumably, their implication was that as Catholics, we should be more conservative. I believe that as Catholics, we should be more compassionate. And I was the greater transgressor in their eyes because I had children and was raising them as liberals. Some of the opponents to the ordinance didn't want to acknowledge their personal bias, so they claimed to be opposed for financial reasons. They predicted that everyone and his brother would be filing suit, and the city would go broke defending itself. Later, when a news story was done on the first anniversary of the adoption of the ordinance, and it was pointed out that not a single suit had been filed, these same opponents claimed that they knew all along that no suits would be filed, proving the ordinance was unnecessary and that this was why they opposed it. In 2001, members of the 1998 City Council were given Courage and Leadership Awards by the LGBT and Friends Alumni Chapter of EMU. The award certificates were presented to us by Judy Shepard, the mother of Matthew Shepard, the young man from Wyoming who was brutally beaten and left to die because of his sexual orientation. As the mother of 3 sons, I was well aware that Mrs. Shepard had worked infinitely harder and suffered infinitely more than any of us on council, and I was truly humbled to meet her and receive this recognition. This experience affected council members differently. Pam Cuthbert was subsequently outed, lost her bid for re-election, and ultimately moved away because of the rejection by her lifelong neighbors. Trudy Swanson was re-elected to council, but was asked to leave her church. I chose not to run for re-election due to family commitments. Ronnie Peterson continued in his political career and is now state representative. While this experience was frequently painful and difficult, it was a crucial milestone for our city, and I'm very proud to have been a part of it. And now I'll turn this over to Mr. Gaulis, who will speak about drafting the ordinance.
Thank you. Yes, I'm John Gaulis, and I was on the Ypsilanti City Council, also representative of the 2nd Ward with Lisa. As Gary had said earlier, in July of 1997, the City Council passed a resolution authorizing the formation of a subcommittee to draft a non-discrimination ordinance. And before I start that, I have to say that one of my recollections at City Council was just being somewhat dumbfounded that in fact there was no non-discrimination element in the actual city code. There was a component in the charter which establishing the Human Relations Commission included all of the different notions of protection and opportunities for people, but there wasn't actually a non-discrimination ordinance. That was just very much a surprise. So after the council's resolution, a subcommittee which was composed of Trudy Swanson from Ward 1, myself from Ward 2, and Pam Cuthbert from Ward 3, which is pretty much the tradition is to take a member from each of the wards so that the entire city is represented. We were charged with then drafting an ordinance. Now, of course, there were a number of cities. There were 2 cities in the state that actually had, at that time, non-discrimination ordinances. There was East Lansing. There was our neighbor to the west, Ann Arbor. But there were also out in Portland, Oregon, also Denver, Colorado. So we had a number of different models that we could look at. I think initially the thought is that we were going to try not to simply copy the Ann Arbor ordinance, because we like to think of ourselves as unique and individuals here. But we would meet at the city attorney's offices. I believe that the attorneys that were working on that was Turhan Ovasik, and Jesse O'Jack also was lent some assistance on that. But in addition to the city's own city attorneys, we had different attorneys in the area that were providing some assistance and suggesting language, including Ms. Dorio, who had been communicating a lot with Pam Cuthbert and coming up with language, because she had obviously been doing a lot of work on that incident to begin with. So we started looking around and tried to figure out which one of the ordinances or which one of the cities we could model their ordinance that would be the best fit for Ypsilanti. Looked at a number of them, actually ended up making some contact with a woman in Iowa City, Iowa, which was not necessarily the first city that would have jumped to mind to be a really progressive, supportive area, but in fact they had a very well-established Human Rights Commission and a non-discrimination ordinance, which happened to be one of the first U.S. cities to extend protection based on sexual orientation or gender identity. So we took that under advisement and looked at some of the language that was in their ordinance. We also have the city attorneys were constantly providing draft language that they felt was appropriate and judicious. And we evaluated that. As the one member on the subcommittee, though, I constantly came back to this sense of pragmatism, knowing that we knew at the very onset that whatever ordinance we drafted was going to be challenged. It would go to referendum immediately upon adoption. So part of the thought was how to craft an ordinance that would withstand the referendum efforts. And part of that involved not creating the Human Relations Commission as like a court of law or so. We consciously avoided giving the Human Relations Commission like subpoena power and true investigatory powers because we thought that would be something that might intimidate some people and cause them to question whether or not the ordinance might have an adverse impact on the community. So we went ahead, drafted the ordinance, brought that back to City Council, and it passed unanimously on the first reading. Of course, there was still much public comment during all of these meetings. But wonderfully, we returned to that ordinance and passed a resolution for the second and final reading to adopt it in December of 1997. And I'm happy to say that the voters, when they were faced with the question, agreed with the City Council, agreed with the ordinance that the subcommittee had drafted, and supported that. And that's the ordinance we still have to this day. No. No. It's not dead.
So it went on and on and on, and I was beginning to get a clue. After weeks of public hearings, you know, each attended by a larger and larger crowd, each providing an opportunity for more hateful anti-gay public comment, then the Public Relations Commission had 4 different possible resolutions to pass that had been drafted by the city attorney, and they opted to, on a 5-4 vote, to do nothing. And so we clearly felt that the city council needed to step in and do something. So the subcommittee was empowered, they drafted the ordinance. This took forever. Did somebody unplug me? Are you okay? This took forever, and in the meantime, the people who were concerned on both sides of the issue kept coming down to regular city council meetings, and so we had a lot of council meetings that went very late and a lot more testimony on both sides, even though we didn't have an ordinance on the agenda yet. The mayor and council members started receiving hateful letters and postcards, hundreds. I personally received hundreds of hateful letters and postcards. Interestingly, most of them had.
What is that?
It's, I think this little girl is
Sitting on a cord, maybe?
sitting on a board.
Not on purpose, I know.
No?
I think it's the connection.
Okay. So most of these had out-of-state duct tape, out-of-state addresses, and it got to the point where I could tell when I came to City Hall what the content of the letter was likely to be. And after a while, I stopped opening them. They were just too painful to read, and they weren't from members of my community, and I started throwing them in a drawer unopened. And then after a while, I started throwing them into the wastebasket unopened. I just couldn't bear to open them. So during these months of waiting for the ordinance,
Come on, Sherry.
tech support. I think so. So I started.
Yeah, I know.
Started instructing people before.
Yeah, it wasn't. Sorry.
We'll just talk loud. We're just sorry. Okay.
Yes. Won't be the first time I've conducted a meeting on my feet in order to be heard. So, so I had to start instructing the audience on the rules of engagement. If they're going to speak, they have to be civil. The audience has to be civil. There would be no booing, no catcalling. At the first sign of incivility, I was just going to stop the hearing. So if you want to be heard, be civil. And people were civil, and that was important to all of us because at the end of the day, we're all going to be neighbors again, right? Yeah. So we need to be civil to each other. And so the meetings were heartbreaking. They went a long time into the night. But finally, we had the ordinance ready to be brought to council for the first reading. And at the first reading, one of the residents who was going to make comments laid some remarks at each of the council members' places and at my place. This was not uncommon. People would sometimes do that so you could have the remarks for later or if they got cut off. And I didn't pay any attention to it. But when the meeting concluded and I read this letter, it was very disturbing. This resident said he was so concerned that we were considering passing this terrible ordinance that he was planning to come to the next meeting with a gun, and during his time of public speaking, he was going to shoot himself in the head to demonstrate how seriously concerned he was that we not pass this ordinance. Well, he brought that to the wrong mayor because as a medical doctor, I turned to my police chief after the meeting and I said, I want you to read this letter and then I want to have this man picked up and taken in for psychological evaluation. I think he's a danger to himself and perhaps a danger to others because if somebody appears in a public space with a gun, you don't really know where they're going to point it. And he said, what do you mean? And I said, I mean what I said. I want him picked up and evaluated. And he said, well, you can't do that. And I said, yes, you can. And he said, well, I would have to get a warrant. And I said, so get a warrant. And he said, it's the middle of the night. I'd have to call a judge and wake him up. And I said, wake him up. And he said, okay. And he did. And he got a warrant on the basis of this letter and my request, and the man was picked up. I don't know if it was against his will, if he went freely when he was asked, but he was evaluated, and then the following day, he was released. So, so now it's the evening of the second and final reading of the new ordinance at Hoyt Conference Center. Tensions were very high. The antis were determined to use this meeting as their last best opportunity to prevent an ordinance from passing. We had some uniformed and undercover police officers present. This was not typical. But because of what had happened at the previous meeting, we thought it was important for safety. In case this resident, who seemed to me to be very troubled and unstable, showed up, which he did. And he walked toward the meeting place with a briefcase in his hand and sat down on a bench outside waiting for the meeting to commence. And I said to one of our police officers, that's the man. And he went over and sat down next to the resident on the bench and asked him what was in the briefcase. And he refused to say. And the officer asked him to open the briefcase, and he refused to open it. So the officer asked him to leave, and he did. And then I heard later, in one of our meetings about this, that an officer was sent to make sure he stayed home. So in the meantime, this was the week before Christmas, and I'm passing out candy canes from my little basket to everyone who entered the meeting, trying to kind of diffuse the tension a little bit, because the tensions were very high. And hundreds of people came, and they seated themselves on either side of the center aisle. They sorted themselves by their beliefs. We had antis on one side and pros on one side. And in the opening portion of the meeting, I reminded everyone of the ground rules. Public speaking's hard enough anyway, and at the end of the day, we're going to all be neighbors, so there won't be any catcalling, no clapping, no booing, no signs of incivility. As long as everyone was civil, anyone who wanted to speak would be heard. We didn't have a cutoff time, except individually, 5 minutes per person. And so the hearing went on for hours, pro alternating with con. And as has been said, some of the testimony was very hard to listen to. So finally, the public hearing phase was complete, and the meeting proceeded to the council's discussion of the ordinance. My turn. I was never so proud as I was that night, because as the mayor, I always spoke last. So I asked if anyone had anything to say, and each council member in turn told a story about something that had happened in their life to someone they loved and what it meant to them that people be treated equally and fairly. It was so touching. And I told my own story and cried. Then it's okay. At the end of that, we voted unanimously to move forward with the ordinance and pass it on a second reading. And that was a short-lived victory, as you've heard, because it was just a matter of weeks before we had a signed petition with a sufficient number of registered voters' signatures from the city saying they wanted the ordinance overturned. And at that point, we decided to turn it over to the voters to decide. Thank you.
We're going to have Ray next. Great. Yeah, we've rearranged this.
Try it.
Yeah.
Maybe it's calm down.
What? I plugged in. Oh. It's not plugged in. So.
Yes.
All right.
Yippee! Well,
Bye-bye, Andrew.
this anniversary is meaningful to me, but I don't know, I didn't play a role as deeply as city councilman, mayor, and other people. But during the time, especially 1996 and 97, I was president of the Ypsilanti Willow and NAACP. And someone brought the issue of a proposed non-discrimination ordinance to the branch. The ordinance was going to, among other things, outlaw discrimination against persons because of their sexual orientation. And of course, that came out of the printing flat down there in Depot Town. Prior to this time, the ordinance or the law only outlawed discrimination against people based on their race, sex, and age. And we were a civil rights organization, and in 1997 was one of our best years because we did really get into a lot of the civil rights issues of the day. The major proponent of the movement in our branch was a fellow named Charles Duty, and he was a member of our executive committee, and he brought it to us, and we discussed it, and of course, there was a lot of debate within the branch because there are so many people of color that are Christian and by traditional teaching. However, we supported the movement, and the branch did pass a resolution, and we supported what happened in the city. I didn't know whether or not we could do that because I didn't know whether or not the national organization, NAACP, the branches of the local organizations are controlled by what happens at the national office in New York. That's your corporate office. And so I got on the horn and I called them and I said, well, can we support this ordinance? And I actually received 2 documents where they had passed a resolution nationally to support ordinance that will support non-discrimination based on sexual orientation, and so we're off and running. We did, upon receiving the news, that it was in sync with the goals of the national organization. We supported by allowing certain meetings and committee meetings to be held at the NAACP office on Harriet Street. And I'm proud of the fact that we became one of the best branches in the nation because of our activity. We had over 450 members. We had a high watermark of about 800 members. And at times, we had a newsletter that we sent out on a periodic basis. Now, of course, in the black community, the black church is very strong. And they were against it. The person who was raising the most hell was Reverend Ewell. And we did some things with Reverend Ewell over the years. In other words, we walked the neighborhood against people pushing crack and cocaine and so forth. So we had a relationship with him. Of course, he's hard right. And but he was against it. He was just totally against it. And it was not peculiar with him. Somebody mentioned that Trudy had problems with, I think, she went to SL's church, I believe.
That's right.
And they just couldn't understand it. Nationally, and I recall this when I think about this, is that Reverend Lowry, who was a very prominent civil rights fighter down in Georgia, used to say that the Bible called for Adam and Eve and not Adam and Steve. Yeah. And we were steadfast. We put it to the vote, and we supported the ordinance wherever we could. Of course, Ronnie Peterson was a member, Trudy Swanson were members of the NAACP, and they led to the ultimate passage of the non-discrimination ordinance. In 1997 was a high watermark for the NAACP, in that at our Freedom Fund dinner in October, we had Morris Dees of the Southern Poverty Law Center down in Alabama, and he was our speaker, and he addressed this issue when he came to speak at our annual dinner, and that was a highlight. I am proud of the branch's participation during this time, and I wish we could be strong again in terms of a lot of issues that still affect African Americans and in terms of civil rights. But this was a highlight. Certainly when the ordinance passed, we celebrated, and I'm glad that I personally, and I'm glad that the branch played a role in the passage of this ordinance. It was history, and I'm proud of the fact that we did get a lot of African Americans involved with it, even though they were going against their ministers. Thank you.
Ray is a little understated, so I want to emphasize that the work that happened with the NAACP chapter and the churches was highly charged and difficult. And the story I'm going to tell next, which is about a big event that happened the Friday night before the election on Tuesday, would have, had we not done that work, could have caused permanent rifts to be in our city, along race lines and along geographic lines around LGBT rights. So the story I'm going to tell is the Reggie White rally story. And at the time of the campaign, just to give you a little background, there were many similar campaigns like this going on around the country. Some were local like ours, and some were larger. Maine had just narrowly lost a statewide effort, just literally months before us. Most relevant to us was that the city of Lansing had lost a campaign just a few months earlier. Anyway, the anti-LGBT campaign people had kind of a campaign in a box that they would take from city to city and state to state. Okay, they had messages that worked, they had fundraising that was readily available, and they had Reggie White. So let's be clear. I'm going to talk about Reggie White in a minute. My wife is giving me cues. For discrimination to be successful, you have to convince one group of people that another group of people is taking something from them. Okay? Division. You divide communities along race or any kind of line, and discrimination will be victorious. Okay? The Reggie White tactic was to try to turn the black community against the LGBT community, and it worked in many communities at the time. So in this case, the rally was planned featuring black celebrities, and this is how it went. They had 3 people featured in this rally. First one was Reggie White, who was a highly opinionated, highly celebrated football star, who frequently spouted stereotyped comments about many groups of people, but saved most of his energy condemning LGBT people. There was Alveda Celeste King, who's the homophobic niece of Martin Luther King. Please recall, oh no, you don't know this yet, but we got a letter from Coretta Scott King herself in support of our cause at one point in the campaign. So families often don't agree, but I'll put down good money that Coretta, as the wife and widow, knew more about her husband's legacy than her niece did. The last part of this triumvirate of hate was the Winans sisters, who were gospel singers well known for a song called "It Ain't Natural."
Oh, no.
The meaning of which should be obvious. So you could see how this would divide a community, right? Famous, respected African Americans telling other members of the community that LGBT is a white issue, that we are trying to take more than has already been taken. The rally took place at Pease Auditorium the Friday before the vote. Our campaign heard about it when I got a call in our home, this was before cell phones, 4 days before the event, from one of the local media sources who wanted to ask for a statement about it. So this fits the MO of that strategy. You spring it big, you spring it with a lot of media hype and hoopla, you catch the other campaign off guard, you swing the election to their side at the last minute. It was a powerful and effective tactic. Almost immediately, our campaign was approached by many members of the black and the LGBT community. They made it clear to us that they viewed this as an issue within their community and they wished to address it, rather than having the campaign do so. We were entirely supportive and scared out of our freaking minds. Everything we had worked on felt like it was on the line. It was the right thing to do, though, so what they did was they held a silent vigil outside Pease Auditorium at the time of the rally. They invited their families and neighbors and friends of the African American community to join with them. They stayed there for hours, worked with the media, held signs, and were a visible presence when members of the minority community came to the rally as attendees. As a side note, there are a couple of historical documentaries one is called Before Stonewall and one is called After Stonewall. In the documentary, these are great. They tell the transition from, what our civil rights movement in the LGBT community has done.
We have them here at the library.
Okay, good. In the documentary After Stonewall, which you can get from the library, an image of this silent vigil is included, of which I think our community should be very proud. On a second side note, this is the first time we see the American Family Association becoming active in Michigan as a sponsor of this event. Gary Glenn, then a full-time AFA organizer, will continue to rear his ugly head in Michigan up until this present day. Anyway, Paul Heaton and I were there to guide news media to the vigil and to represent the campaign after that. Watching people walk into the doors of Pease Auditorium to have hate rhetoric actually sung to them made for a very long night, I can tell you. Ultimately, the rally backfired on their hateful campaign. They had poor attendance, most of which were from outside the city. The coverage, due to some frantic work on our part and the vigil, described it as an anti-gay effort to divide the community against gay people. It was covered in national news, consistently in negative light. Shortly after our victory and their loss, the anti-LGBT campaigns dropped this rally as a featured part of their tactics, which I'm also very proud of. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the campaign itself, and Lisa and I are going to go back and forth here a little bit, okay? So nationally, here it was for LGBT campaigns. We lost these campaigns. We lost the majority of them, over 80% of them. When we lost big. We lost by massive percentages. When we won by a hair. You could see 1% from where we were different in the votes, okay? Lansing had just lost a bitter campaign to protect LGBT rights. Maine had just lost a statewide vote. In addition, the state of Maine is demographically much friendlier to this issue at the time. They are white. Maine is largely white. For complex reasons, a white voting population is predicted to be friendlier to LGBT issues than populations of color. So let's talk demographics. Demographically, Ypsilanti did not look good for an election. Our opponents were justifiably optimistic. 30% African American, a large working class and poor segment, and a moderate education level across the city. In general, white educated middle class voters are more likely to support LGBT votes, and Ypsilanti had pockets of them, but not enough to win. The odds, as they say, were not in our favor. During the campaign, we would have over 250 people volunteer. We would raise $36,000, a record for this city. That is, it was a record until 2002 when we beat that total. In the second campaign we had to wage. We talked to vast numbers of voters in our city one-on-one. Our campaign was called Ypsilanti Campaign for Equality, YCFE. Our opponents were called Citizens Opposing Special Treatment, COST. And now Lisa is going to pick it up.
So, turn it on. We turn right across the street from us at a sign.
So, and I'm going to backtrack a little bit here. So, as you heard when the ordinance was passed on December 16th, it was short-lived, and by early January, the petitions had been turned in and the ordinance had been stopped temporarily. So, but one of the things that wasn't talked about is not only, they actually had 2 petitions and they were going for 2 votes that would have been very, very confusing. We had the one that repealed the ordinance, but they also were trying for, to amend our city charter, which at the time, what they were going for was something that was very similar to what Cincinnati had, and actually what we ended up fighting in 2002. But one of the things that we did, we actually filed a lawsuit against them. We had a wonderful attorney, Douglas Shapiro, who is now, he worked pro bono, I think,
Yes, he did.
for us. He is now a judge on the 3rd District Court of Appeals of Michigan, and he helped us with this one and also in 2002. But so we successfully challenged the charter amendment with the lawsuit, and they did throw that one out. So we only had one election. But, and also then when we, I mean, for me, one of the things that I still remember is us as a group, after we knew that there was going to be an election, sitting in Beth and Lisa's house in the living room. And there's some of you guys that are sitting here that were all there trying to wrap our heads around having an election and kind of trying to figure out when we wanted to have it. And that was when it was decided that we would shoot for the one in May. And that was probably sometime in mid-January. So I'm not really sure, Beth, how I ended up being the volunteer coordinator, but it just happened. It kind of, yeah, nobody else would do it. But I don't know, I think Julie was helping out. We had one of the most amazing bottle drives that you would ever have, and Julie, stand up. Stand up. She had this bottle drive. I mean, it was the most organized bottle drive I've ever seen in my life. I mean, she had us maps for everybody where we were to go, and then she also had us all going to different grocery stores to take our cans. I mean,
And I had enough friends with trailers. That was the best.
yes, I mean, it was, we made like $1,200 from that thing, on that bottle drive. It was pretty amazing. But anyway, so and we did a lot of fundraising kinds of things like that. We did house parties. We had tons of mailings. I remember 2 events that we had. One was an auction at Arbor Brewing, and I think that was it was in the winter. And we had Greg Louganis. I mean, we had so many creative people. We had somebody sending the actual tickets. Greg Louganis signed them. He was out then. I think Barney Frank had done some things for us. We had but I think he also gave us some stuff to have at the auction. And Matt and Renee Graff were wonderful to our campaign. And this was before we even had the Corner Brewery. And, so we had that event there. We also had the dance at what was then the Clarion, way over on the west side of Ann Arbor. I mean, we had a lot of fun people that had, and so we did have a lot of fun events too. So but as Beth said, we raised a bunch of money, and we sent letters. God bless Paul Heaton for all of his writing, and there's some things there that we just sent things out to everybody, and we got money from all across everywhere. I mean, family, friends, all different states. But anyway, so our campaign, we ended up having a campaign office right next to La Fiesta Mexicana. And Michelle was the owner of La Fiesta, was just wonderful to us. She was fabulous. And still to this day, I go past that building. I don't know, I think we need a historic plaque on it. But I mean, as Beth mentioned, there were cell phones, but we had to put in phone lines for our phone bags there for every single phone. On 3x5 cards in our little yellow box had everybody's name and phone number and email addresses to call people to get them to sign up for shifts. We had phone banking shifts, we had door-to-door, and our tactic, and we had no people that had ever worked on a campaign before, ever. And Beth and Paul did so much investigating and called, and it was a voter ID campaign, and that was what we all learned. And that has been, when LGBT campaigns go on, it's how they win is voter ID. And we talked to all of our neighbors. We went door to door, we called them, we rated them 1 through 5, and if they hung up on us, they were a 5. It didn't matter. I just remember that too. And we all learned how to do campaigns from that. It was a grassroots campaign. What else do I have in here? We always did reminder calls. Beth was on my ass all the time about reminder calls. I mean, Beth was on my ass all the time. Did you do this call? How many people are coming? Did you make sure you did this? But it was hugely, she was. It was hugely, hugely successful. And that's how I learned campaigns too. I mean, we had a lot of fun. I know that we celebrated birthdays. Paul had ordered pizza like there's no tomorrow. We had a relationship. I mean, we had a lot of great relationships with places that donated us food. Michelle did, Sidetrack did, Arbor Brewing did. And these people, I mean, these are my friends for life. And I'm so glad that Carol and Rhonda are here, and Julie and Sherry, and Jay. I mean, and we had a database that Sherry and Jay, that was how we kept track of everything. What? And Ed and Roger, I mean, they live they live in Detroit now. I mean, Paul is in DC, but he went up to Traverse City for a while, and he did the campaign up there. Paul is my son's godfather. I mean, and I did find a husband, even though Paul wanted me to ask you out, John, to find out if you were gay or not. So we did. I mean, we did have fun, but oh my God, the tension, and we would fight, but we all came together. And Glenn, oh my God, Glenn and Paul, the writing, it was just an amazing, and it was a life-changing experience for me. And that's why I got married. We got married on the anniversary.
All right, Beth, you're shutting me off. So Beth gets to talk about the rest.
I'm going to short stop this on the way back to Beth just to mention the role that Kathleen Reynolds played. Russell, excuse me, Kathleen Russell. Okay, because and one of the things that she did was she set out to bring in members of the religious community, because this was being painted to the public as, you know, if you're religious, you have to be against this, and we knew better. And so she reached out to ministers in the community and in the various parts of the religious community, to the Jewish community and the different parts of the community, to say, you know, where do you stand on this? And if they stood with us, will you be public about standing with us? And they did.
One other thing on that, I want to, as far as that, there's some members from the Episcopal Church of the Incarnation back there from Ann Arbor, and they were fabulous. I mean, those folks came over and did phone banking for us and door to door. I mean, I think it was, Kara, you were going door to door all the time. I mean, so many people. Michael and Kara, I think, went together a lot. I remember setting them up and stuff. And Joe Summers ended up marrying John and I, because our wedding ceremony had a lot to do with the ordinance, and Joe performed the wedding ceremony.
And I want to mention Lois Planter-Faber and Patty Maher. They were there at the very first meeting, and they stuck with it all the way through, as did, oh my God, I worked with her. I'll think of it in a minute. But
And then we'll pass
she
it
lives
right
in
back.
Traverse City now.
Oh, Joanne and Myrna.
Joanne Sheard and Myrna. So there were a lot of troopers.
And
Brant and Brian.
Yeah.
So many.
I know.
We've clearly lost control.
Well, that's a good thing.
So we did not know anything about campaigning, and that is the truth. Many of us had sat on various boards of nonprofits, but that's nonprofit work and political campaigning, electoral work is a vastly different animal. So what the heck do we do? Lansing had lost a campaign, an election just a few months earlier. A couple of their leaders came down and sat down with our campaign and walked us through everything. They walked us through what had worked. They walked us through what had not worked. Their election was laid bare to us, and this was incredibly sobering. This is how we came up with voter ID and the start of our message. Okay. So voter ID, we talked about that a little bit. It's basically consisted of convincing hundreds of people to talk about a highly charged topic on a one-on-one basis at their front door in the middle of the night, or on the phone to dial up strangers you've never talked to, and do the same thing. And we did that. And I'm continually amazed. I still hear people telling stories about how I badgered them into doing it. And So, but it starts with a list, right? You have to have a list of voters. So Pete, Murdoch, and Grace invited us into their house, Paul and I into their house, showed us their voter list, let us copy their voter list, taught us how to manage a voter list. And I'm not sure if Pete's happy or sad that he taught me how to campaign, but it's a true thing. Actually, his list was given to us on paper. We had to manually type every voter into what was an early spreadsheet. And Sherry Stetton, front row and center right in front of me, managed that database for us. Not a fun or easy task. But what do you do with the database, and how do you get this going? So we got on the phone. Paul and I called Maine. We called small cities in Washington that we had never heard of before. We called all over the country. We called the NGLTF, which I don't even know if it's still around, and National Gay and Lesbian Task Force. Okay, good. And they gave us Dave Fleischer, who's a trainer. So, and we pieced together bit by bit. Patty Maher helped us write scripts for people, put together a campaign, and started volunteers going out and doing all this work. Then there was the matter of the literature, so both pro and con. Paul Heaton, Glenn Sard in the back, and myself did the vast majority of the message work. I'm afraid I was more of a yes or no person at the time, but I was heavily involved. We used direct mail to targeted voters. We used flyers to go door to door and hit every voters. Some of our campaign lit and some of theirs is on display around here today. We learned to stick to our message and use the word gay. We learned that you cannot de-gay the campaign, never stray from your campaign message, and you'd think that would be not rocket science. But if you look at the campaigns that were happening around the country, and even now, there's a temptation, okay? The vast majority of them did not. They used human rights, okay, as a euphemism. In our own state, when we had the marriage campaign for the state constitution, the ad that we ran had two people looking at a car with the hood up, talking about the car, and that was supposed to be a euphemism for gay. I mean, this is how hard it is to get people to do this, okay? Why is it so hard? Okay, I'm sorry, I'm straying from my notes a little bit. So it's really hard because of internalized homophobia, both as individuals and as a community, okay? And there's so many other reasons that are stated each and every time, but I lived through it, we've lived through it, and I can tell you right now that internalized homophobia is really, really hard to fight. So we used the word gay because we decided that we had to get our message across to Joe Budweiser, was the euphemism we used, okay? And that would be the best way to get it across, okay? Should we be PC and use all the initials? Okay, we decided to use the word gay. Can't we just use human dignity? No. Secondly, okay, and our messages were, one, there ought to be a law. It's about as simple as that. Glenn Sard just tossed this off extremely early in the campaign, and it became kind of a mantra. And if you look on John Gollish's chest here, he's got a button that says, there is a law. With a very, very dried flower on it. The second message was this ordinance protects everybody, regardless of their sexual orientation. And the third message was, when special rights came up, I don't think they use it as much anymore, but at the time that was the message. We turned it around by saying that our opponents wanted the special right to discriminate against gay people. Right. Once you get the rhythm, it's a little bit, you can see how it would work. Secondly, this was not about a community. We weren't protecting a gay community. We were protecting people, okay? We did not campaign, okay, our stories, our lives, and our contributions. Ypsilanti is a small town, which could have been either good or bad, by the way. That's a sword that cuts both ways. But we made it clear that to the people that cost, citizens opposing special treatment, was trying to discriminate against people that they knew, who they work with, who mow their lawns on Saturday, who eat at our local restaurants and tip you well, to send kids to our schools. This was personal, and we made sure that everybody knew that. Their lit was predictably upsetting to us and to the town. Images of men badly dressed as women, thinly cloaked statements about protecting our children, etc. Each literature piece spun us out emotionally, and at the same time we had to stay the course and stick to our plan and our message. I'll also say a message about yard signs. I can tell you to this day, when I walk my dog through the neighborhoods, which houses had the anti-yard signs. They may have turned over 2-3 times. It doesn't matter. I still remember the yard signs.
Who signed, yeah.
Hmm?
When they did the petition, who signed?
Yeah, who signed?
Which neighbor signed it?
Yeah, that list has fallen off my brain, thank goodness.
Only the ones around.
Yeah, Julie's mentioning that we saw the petitions when they were circulated, and we knew who signed the petitions, of course.
Who lived in our street.
That's right.
On our street, yeah.
Mm. They lived on our street. These were our neighbors. Our daughter babysat for a neighbor who had an anti-yard sign in their yard. Okay, and that predictably did not last very long. The temptation to go off message was monstrous. Reacting was so inviting. Can't we just attack them? No. Can't we discount that message? Can't we argue with it? No. Can't we argue with them point by point? No. This was boring, hard, and redundant. We had to continue to state that Ypsilanti needed a good law to protect all citizens from discrimination, including gay people. There's a book in the library has available for loan, and my personal copy is on the table over there. It's called Gay Rights in the Ballot Box. Check it out, literally. Amy Stone is the writer. She was a graduate student at EMU during this campaign, and she interviewed us extensively. She studied campaigns all over the country, and she cites our work here as a textbook for the right way to handle LGBT campaigns. There's literally an entire chapter about Ypsilanti in there. So you should be very proud. Lisa, do you have more?
Always.
Because I'm going to go on to the closure.
Yeah, I can't think of anything.
Okay. So election night. So election day. Okay. Now we've identified voters. Okay. And we know who's on our side. We know who's on their side. Now what do we do? Okay. Again, we hit the phones. Called everybody across the country, and this is what we did. We had poll watchers. These are not people that stand in front and hand out lit, although we did have them. We had people that spent all day long at the polls, behind the polls, who were able to see the names of everybody who voted. Not how they voted, but that they voted. And anybody who was on our list who had not voted, sometime during the day,
Phone call.
we started calling them. Okay. And here's a great story. In some cases, we went to their door. And here's a great story. Glenn Sard, modestly sitting in the back, had one of the polls on the east side. At 15 minutes to close of voting, he noticed one missing voter from his list. Glenn left the poll, went to that person's home, knocked on his door, picked him up, drove him back to the poll, and we won that poll by 1 vote. If you don't think your vote matters, it does. Think again. We won the vast number of precincts. The 2 precincts we lost by a handful of votes you could count on one hand. The final percentages were 56 to 44%. Until 1977, LGBT rights were not perceived as that controversial, believe it or not. Houston had a massive victory of a ballot initiative early in the 70s, for instance. I think it was like 70-30. It was insane. And that was in Texas, for goodness sake. Okay? Then, in 1977, Anita Bryant started her inflammatory Save Our Children anti-gay campaign, and all that changed quickly and dramatically. We can talk about Anita Bryant and other LGBT campaigns ad nauseum, believe me. The point here is that Ypsilanti's margin of victory that day was the biggest in the nation since Anita Bryant took her hate message to the country. The ripple effects of our campaign have impacted 7 other cities, helped create Michigan Equality, now Equality Michigan, and many of our leaders and volunteers have continued to be active politically. That is our presentation, and I would now like to open it up for questions and answers. Oh, no.
I have one thing real quick.
There goes control.
Before we do this, there is an event that's going to happen in the near future, and it's the first of its kind in our city. Catherine, you want to come up here and announce this?
Yeah.
This is Catherine Garrison. She's the head of First Fridays Ypsilanti, and she has some announcement to make.
Thank you, Gary. Yeah, so I work with First Fridays, and we've been doing it for about 4 years, and this June, we're going to be hosting the first Ypsi Pride on Washington Street. We're calling it Ypsi Pride just to keep it in trend with Pride events all across the country and internationally for June. And there has been recently an event called Ypsi Pride over the years by the CVB that was like a cleanup thing, and they've actually changed their name to Ypsi Proud this year, so we're actually going to reclaim that name for Pride. And we're doing it in June 2nd, First Fridays. It's going to be the North Block of Washington. And there's a whole group of people that are helping us do this. It's not a First Fridays event. It's not organized by First Fridays, but we're helping to facilitate all the logistics of having the stage and the street closure. So if anybody's interested in participating or helping to organize or do some fundraisers at your house, we really need some help because it's a really short window of us making it happen. So thank you.
One last thing. I'm a member of a resistance group, and I believe I would like to start one for the LGBT community because I think if things happen as we have been talking about, and certainly Beth, you mentioned this, I think we need to be prepared to do this possibly again. So I would like to get out front. So if anybody's interested in that, please connect with me when this is over tonight.
In the last couple of weeks, we've had some things that happened in Ypsilanti, or near Ypsilanti. And today I couldn't help notice that all of the people on the CNN and the news actually pronounce Ypsilanti correctly. And if you know the history of our town, people just can't get it. But they really nailed it today correctly for all the events that occurred in Ypsilanti.
Who has questions or comments? You first. And then you.
I just had to chuckle with myself because this was 20 years ago. I was in my mid-40s, and this was my first activism ever. And I went door to door and gave pamphlets. I hated doing that. And then the second time around, it was election day, election day. And I was standing out on a road someplace with a big sign, vote yes. And people would either honk or flip the bird. But I remember, I was young, forgive me. So it was raining just enough that I thought, I'm up for sainthood.
Thank you, first of all. They're amazing memories, actually. But thank you all very, very much. I do have something that Ray said a while ago, and then you just mentioned an LGBTQ resistance. Ray had said something, I don't remember exactly, about people of color needing to work with other groups now. So I want to sort of put those two together and go, why aren't we doing that instead? Especially given the history here of the NAACP supporting this campaign and supporting this movement here. So to to me, it just sort of sounds like, okay, we're stronger together.
Yes,
Again,
yes.
for bringing that up. and
Thank you.
for responses.
Roger.
We moved here in 2000, but we're a big part, and the church I pastored, a big part of trying to pass the ordinance in Lansing. I'm glad that Lansing was able to at least sit down, probably Bob Egan and Cheryl Vanderkerkhoff.
That's right.
That's
exactly who it was.
For this, and then we moved here in 2000, and there was, within a year or two, an attempt to overthrow this ordinance. So we have a case history also of defending it one time, and so if it happens again, we've worked on it.
So we've a couple of times. So for those of you who don't know, in 2002, the AFA came back with Tom Monahan and tried to amend our city charter, which is basically our city constitution. And they tried to. The language they used was they wanted to prohibit protection for gay, lesbian, bisexual people. Okay, and we had to remount the campaign. And we ended up defeating that one 63 to 37%. We raised $65,000, and we used 400 volunteers that time. So hopefully they've gotten the message, and they'll leave Ypsilanti alone from now on. Julie.
At the time, did we know how successful it was?
Yes.
Nationwide?
Yes, we did.
I didn't remember that part.
Yeah, we did. And
Repeat the question.
okay, so the question was at the time, did we know how big our victory was? Absolutely. Okay. I'm not sure that we knew the national import of it, but compared to every other campaign that we had heard about, it was a striking difference, the large percentage by which we won here. So, and then other research came in there.
Can you help me remember, didn't sexual orientation, wasn't it broadly including gender orientation?
So we just added gender identity and expression to the city, to the ordinance just a month and a half ago, okay? And I was terribly confused because I knew we had gender included in there, okay? And it was 20 years ago, so we used what is probably dated ways of doing it, and we included gender in a definition portion rather than as a characteristic or category all on its own, okay? So that's since been amended, and now we are more up to date.
Well, I just wanted to say I attended the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force annual meeting in Philadelphia in 98, 99, and it was with great pride that I was able to say to New York City activists what backwards town they were living in, that they didn't have gender orientation either as a characteristic or in a definition.
Good job.
And he, yeah, so it was quite successful. Thank you.
Good job. Rhonda.
I have to say I'm really proud. You know, at the time Carol and I lived in the beautiful, wonderful Normal Park. And I have to say I was really proud of Lisa and John for being our representatives and that wonderful community of Normal Park. Unfortunately, our house got smaller and we got bigger. But this brings up so many memories for me. Oh my God, I will never forget some of the hatred we listened to in some of those meetings. But also, you know, some of the joy that we experienced too, because we were in the process of adopting our daughter Maggie, who is now 18. And how, when we brought her home, how it was just our neighbor said, oh, are you know, is this the little girl you're babysitting? We're like, no, she's staying. And we felt so empowered because we could actually say something like that. And it was just wonderful, you know, just a wonderful feeling.
I just want to give a shout out to so many people who are yet unnamed who supported that campaign. I remember there was one woman, she worked on the line for Ford, And she made it a point to work overtime. And she donated 100% of her overtime to the campaign.
Wow.
She wrote in on her chopper, and there was a $1,000 check every week or every week. So many people like her who were just behind the scenes supportive of the campaign.
That's a great story.
I had completely forgotten that one. That's excellent.
I just wanted to say one more thing. You know, it's been a long time and I had forgotten about the database. What I do remember is I was out of work and I talked to Beth, and Beth said, why don't you volunteer? Because Beth is very good about making sure I had something to eat, which was pizza 5 nights a week. And I said, I'll do anything that you want except phone bang. And she made sure that I did everything except phone bang.
Which is, by the way, what every single person says.
I was lucky that Beth listened to me. But what I want to say is being here tonight, living now as we are in the age of Shouty Cheeto and Mike Pence, love wins every time. That's right. Yeah. And we have to stay the course. That's right. We have to stay local. It will take a long time for the feds to come and take away what we have here, but if we aren't vigilant now, it will disappear like that. So I say especially to young people, this is the hard, shitty work that we have to do every day. It's not on Facebook, it's not on Twitter, it's talking to people that you know, doing boring work. You're a nameless, faceless cog in a wheel so that we can win the greater good. Love wins. And we have all heard horrible, horrible, horrible things repeatedly. And I want to say to us, put those aside. Love wins. Love will always embrace hate. We will always find a way to envelop it and smother it and put it out. As long as we stay the course and come from a place of love.
Amen.
I was just going to say that the Quakers weren't mentioned. And the Quakers did a lot of volunteering. I had been attending there when my daughter was a baby, when Sean was a baby. That was her with the little baby running around. And she was just a kid during all of this. And Jan Wright was the head of this LGBT project through the Quaker, through AFSC, American Friends Service Committee. And she actually came in and taught us how to have those really hard conversations at the door. And she had this great method, I use it to this day, called LARA, L-A-R-A, and she taught us, you know, how to listen to people that we don't agree with, how to affirm the stuff that we do agree with, you know, like, oh yeah, my daughter has had that same problem, you know, like how to respond, you know, and I've had to teach her how, you know, you have to be tolerant and loving to your enemies, you know, and then at the end add that little piece of information that might change their minds. So that was a great tool, and I really thank the Quakers for coming in.
Thank you. Thank you for adding that.
I just wanted to say first off, like, thank you for coming out. As a young person, like, this all happened a year after I was born, so my community's history is like really amazing. Hearing your guys' history is really cool. And I just wanted to ask, like, if you guys, you mentioned having resistance, if there's any LGBT-focused movements or works that you guys are involved in right now, because like we still need to keep improving. You said the gender identity was only included like a month and a half ago, and as like a trans person, that's a little bit worrying. Yeah. But like, is there anything that like you guys want to promote that we want to know about that like you're working for right now?
We need equality of access for bathrooms.
Yes.
Citywide, countywide.
Amanda?
This is just, sorry, is it okay if I say something?
Yes.
I'm not speaking for the library. I'm not speaking for the library. I'm speaking for myself, but personally, I feel like we would need some sort of ordinance or some sort of path forward that would allow more access to like gender neutral bathrooms, at least within the city, and then ultimately like countywide would be something. You know, safe like schools for people who like children who are, you know, LGBT. It's just things that come off the top of my head. Didn't mean to steal them.
Mayor, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would add to a few
You want to
different
come
things. The Juntoy Community Center has a policy committee that's sort of getting back engaged, is being led by Michael Anthony, who is the Ypsilanti Township resident, and is looking for people to come join and look at policy priorities. Juntoy Community Center is the LGBT resource organization in Washtenaw County, all volunteer run. Another thing is that YCS, Ypsi Community Schools, board members, and I'm working with them some, are working on a transgender policy. They really want to be, you know, proactive and have a really, really strong policy supporting transgender students in the school district. And I'm sure we welcome any participant or help with the full board members, Sharon Irvine and Maria Scheller Edwards on their policy committee. And they'll need people to come to meetings, and those are on upcoming agendas. I don't think they're quite ready to bring it forward, but going to those meetings really matters. Also, Equality Michigan, a statewide organization, is asking communities, folks around the state on March 28th, so in a couple Tuesdays from now, to fly the transgender flag below the American flag for either that day or that week. That was the day that Capitol was before the Supreme Court. That got bounced back down, but they're still doing that, and there'll be a rally in Lansing that day. And so we'll have a resolution on council meeting next week. Waiting to get it from Equality Michigan to do that in the city, and I'll encourage the library to look at that, and the school board's going to take that up as well, so there'll need to be support for that. So those are just a couple of things coming out. I appreciate really the comment about working with communities of color. I think especially if we think about our public schools, which are largely students of color, I don't know if you know, we have trans students of color in these community schools, and we know that violence, especially against LGBT people of color, but particularly trans people of color, is some of the worst statistically. And so I think that we have an opportunity still, and looking not only, same as I say with the immigration ordinances, at our great little place and what's made us so proud of who we all are, and all of what you guys have done to make us so proud of who we are. But what about all of our surrounding townships? What about the other school districts across our county? We really need to still go one by one. So it's not just our more progressive urban cores that are protecting, and our maybe more progressive school districts, but all of those sort of in our surrounding areas. And that's something that the JPCC Policy Committee, is one of those routes too.
I would like to. I think that part of what we're doing here and why we're doing it is to hand this down. Because we are, no, this is our history. This is our history. And one of the reasons that I did this was because I felt that we needed to bring our history forward so that we can send it back. And when you spoke, absolutely. Absolutely. Young people need to understand that this is a fight that will never stop.
That's right.
It will never stop.
Yeah.
And so we're in it, and we have to pass it down if we want to protect it.
Yeah.
So I'm so pleased to hear you. And I believe that we have to do communities of color, and we also have to have LGBT youth and allies together. So if people want to try to start to do that, I'm happy to be a way to make that happen. Yes, ma'am.
But you're an awesome model. You guys are just such an awesome model. Yeah.
And on that note, thank you. And we'll be hanging around for a while, but thank you very much. I think the program is concluded.